being recording. This is the June 17th, 2021 Northside Green Zone meeting. And we are going to hold off on roll call for a minute just because of not having quorum yet. So the purpose of tonight's meeting is primarily to review the draft Upper Harbor Terminal AUAR comment letter, which is due by June 24th. So what I can do, if it makes sense, is read it out loud, or if everyone has it in front of them, they can read it to themselves silently. I am open to either option.
Will you read it, please?
Yes, happy to. All right, so the letter begins to Miss Hillary Dvorak. Says the Northside Green Zone Task Force submits these comments in response to the draft alternative urban area-wide review of the Upper Harbor Terminal redevelopment project. The Northside Green Zone Task Force appreciates the City of Minneapolis completing this necessary environmental review and the opportunity to provide comment. In reviewing the UHT AUAR, the Northside Green Zone Task Force was specifically looking for responses to the questions and content proposed in its March 8th, 2021 comment letter on the AUAR scoping document. The task force requests that further research and documentation is needed around cumulative impacts, air pollution from both stationary and mobile sources, and cleanup of site contamination. The city should consider the AUAR incomplete until these issues are addressed. Cumulative impacts. In our March 8th, 2021 letter, we wrote an expanded cumulative impacts analysis of current pollution sources, including surrounding facilities, I-94, etc., must be conducted to assure a reduction in the cumulative pollution legacy in this area. Doing an overall cumulative impact assessment is particularly important as the UHT site neighbors facilities such as GAF do not have to undergo permit review since they are grandfathered in. We would like to know how the city is assessing the cumulative impacts of this development and assuring the community that a reduction in net benefit is occurring during any project's construction, remediation, and operation. The AUAR interpreted the rules for cumulative impacts to only include future related projects. While it is important to consider future and related construction phases, the task force would specifically like to see an analysis of the existing impacts and how the proposed development will increase or decrease impacts in this environmental justice community. The AUAR states that all other impacts from these future projects will be addressed via regulatory permitting and approval measures. Therefore, they will be individually mitigated to ensure no cumulative impacts occur to environmental and community resources. How do you individually mitigate cumulative impacts? Specifically, the task force would like to see an analysis akin to the Cumulative Levels and Effects Law authored by Representatives Clark and Bergland. The Cumulative Levels and Effects Law states that a permit, or in this case, a project's environmental review, should not be approved without analyzing and considering the cumulative levels and effects of past and current environmental pollution from all sources on the environment and residents of the geographic area within which the facility's emissions are likely to be deposited. The task force would include pollution from I-94 industrial facilities in the vicinity, traffic emissions, and on-site operations as past, current, and future resources or sources. Air pollution. As noted in the section above, the task force is particularly concerned about existing air pollution from mobile and stationary sources that cumulatively create some of the worst air quality in the state in the Northside Green Zone. The AUAR states, the AUAR study area is currently meeting all national ambient air quality standards for the criteria air pollutants. For the foreseeable future, the trend of lower per vehicle emissions is expected to at least offset growth in vehicle volumes. Therefore, the AUAR study area is expected to continue meeting the national ambient air quality standards with or without implementation of the development scenarios. Based on the proposed volumes, the proposed development scenarios do not exceed thresholds that would require a quantitative, I'm not actually sure what MSAT analysis is, but MSAT analysis. Therefore, the project is not expected to adversely affect air quality, end quote. First, The National Ambient Air Quality Standards is a floor, not a ceiling, and should not be interpreted to mean that air quality is, in quotes, healthy, even if standards are being met. Also, it is unclear how the increased number of vehicle trips generated during and after construction will have no impact on the air pollution volumes in the community. Due to the heightened impact of air pollution in this area, qualitative analysis is not sufficient. The task force reinforces its recommendation for quantitative cumulative levels and effects analysis before the AUAR could be approved. Site contamination. The AUAR states, quote, additional phase 2 assessments may be required to assess the extent of existing contaminants. Any redevelopment of the property will require coordination with the MPCA to determine the appropriate remediation measures and handling of known and unknown contaminants encountered, end quote. What will the criteria be for undertaking additional phase 2 assessments? The task force would recommend that the city and developers be proactive and include a phase 2 assessment prior to AUAR approval. However, at the very least, the city should share the protocol for additional assessments to increase transparency around how this decision will be made. In summary, the Northside Green Zone Task Force appreciates the opportunity to submit these comments to the City of Minneapolis and asks that the city conduct further quantitative analysis of air pollution and cumulative pollution impacts prior to approving the AUAR. The Northside Green Zone was designated by the Minneapolis City Council, and the community is eager to see the city take action in accordance with the values and goals established by the Green Zone Resolution to protect the health and well-being of overburdened residents. Sincerely, Minneapolis Northside Green Zone Task Force. Theoretically would be adopted today, June 27th or sorry, June 17th, and then copying the city council, the mayor, and the sustainability division. Are there any comments that people want to add, questions that they have? Go ahead, Michelle.
Did you see my comment on there?
Yes, I do. Do you want me to read that out loud, or would you like to read it out loud?
Could you read it? Because I don't have it.
Yes, no problem. So Michelle added a comment on the air pollution section that says, I know that cumulative impacts isn't a state law yet, and that Karen's law was specific to East Phillips, but the exact same pollution problems and health problems exist here, and it should be. Karen shows the North Side when she does presentations, and we know the health impacts based on the Botno study, among others, I'm sure I'm not aware of.
I can't hear anything. I don't know what's going on.
Sorry, who was that? Oh, is that Yolanda? Okay, I'll keep reading the comment. I'm really concerned about the health impacts as a result of the air pollution and the 4 Title I polluters, meaning those falling under the National Ambient Air Quality Standards of the Clean Air Act, that are within a mile of the Lowry Bridge. Just seeing what those polluters physically do to Mississippi River, huge particles, should be enough to alarm anyone. Not sure if this concern translates to anything for the letter, but I needed to share. Hi, Miss Yolanda. Michelle, did you want to add anything related to the comment?
Yeah, I just feel like that health piece is a huge concern for me. And I don't know if that, with the cumulative impacts, like, does that automatically shout health to people? That's my question.
Mm.
Or do we need to say it specifically?
I don't think it would hurt to be specific. Maybe we could put just like a reference to what East Phillips is doing in the cumulative impacts section and talk about the health considerations of cumulative impacts.
We could also add a sentence on health impacts after the first sentence in air pollution, because it mentions, this pollution sources create some of the worst air quality in the state in the Northside Green Zone, so that we could also reference the increased asthma and cardiovascular and heart attack disease in there.
Yeah, that would be good. Thank
Does anyone have proposal for language there? Like the Northside Green Zone, or in the Northside Green Zone, residents some of the highest of asthma and and cardiovascular diseases. And it looks like with Marquita and Yolanda joining us, we should have 10. So I'm going to call roll now. And then we will come back to comments and when we're ready, do a vote. So for roll call, I will call your name, unmute and just say here or present or whatever way you would like to express your presence. So we have first I'll call on Jackie.
Here.
Joanne.
Here.
Michelle.
Here.
Akia.
Here.
Jim.
Here.
Lars.
Here.
Anthony.
I'm here.
Julie.
Here.
Yolanda.
Here.
Marquita.
Here.
Did I miss anyone for roll call? All right, well, that is 10 members and creates a quorum of the task force, so we can conduct business. The next would be, does anyone want to make a motion to approve the agenda and accept the minutes from last month, or not, yeah, was it earlier this month, 2 weeks ago, a week and a half ago, whenever that last meeting was?
I'll make the motion.
I will second it.
Great,
Go ahead.
thank you. All right, so then I will call on our voting members and indicate either by saying yes or aye or no or nay, whether you are for or against accept the motion. So Jackie.
Yes.
Joanne.
For.
Michelle.
Yes.
Akia.
Yes.
Lars.
Yes.
Yolanda.
Yes.
Wonderful. So that motion carries and the agenda is accepted and the meeting or adopted and the meeting minutes are accepted. Back to discussing of the letter. Are there any other comments, questions, additions, subtractions that we want to make to the letter? Feel free to raise your hand, unmute yourself, drop a comment in the chat, whatever works best.
I have a comment.
Go for
This
it.
is Lars. Yeah, I mean, there was a lot of frustrating things that came up during the last meeting, but one of the things for me that was the most egregious, I thought, was when the conversation began about how the permit would not allow for that kind of building based on height. And all of a sudden, it was like, oh, well, we can just change the permit. That is extremely insulting to any residents living around this area, Marshall Terrace, the Northside, that have been dealing with GAF, for the last 30 years, and have been repeatedly told nothing can be done because they're working on a permit from the 1970s. Those two stark contrasts, are one of the most infuriating parts of my entire time being involved in the green zone. And if there is a way, I mean, it does sound to me like it was acknowledged in a way in the draft you read. But man, I would love to put a little bit more of a point on that. In my opinion, it personifies everything that's wrong with government. It's just that this group of people, for this purpose, especially when it involves millions of dollars, is okay to change permits. But for the hundreds and thousands of people that have died of asthma and cancer over the last few generations, 5 generations, screw you guys. Sorry, nothing we can do. I'm sorry I can't be more articulate about what that verbiage would look like. That was just something that really, really stood out to me during the last meeting.
Well, this is Jim with CPED. So I don't want to discount anything anybody says, and I don't want this to. I purposely stay quiet a lot of times in these meetings because I feel like I don't want to get into sounding like I'm rebutting what people say. But just on the height issue, as comparing a height permit to some of the other permits, the thing that's a little different, I guess, is that our zoning ordinance, rightly or wrongly, whether people agree with it or not, does allow citywide to increase height through. So in the AUAR, when they say that the height doesn't meet the ordinance, that the remedy that the development team or anybody would have would be to ask for an increased height, is I believe what they are saying in there, that still would have to go before our city processes and still would have to be approved. But I guess the difference is just because you can look at any planning commission meeting. I've worked for the city for 20 years, and that's something I did. I mean, every meeting there is an increase in height of buildings. So, it's something that's fairly commonly done throughout the city. And then I think one thing that was confusing people a little bit was the critical area regulations and people saying, well, there's a height there and you should never get a chance to increase the height or not. But the way the DNR and the state legislature wrote the rules, and then the way the city wrote the zoning ordinance, and I guess I don't even know if I want to bring this up, but the reason I know that is I wrote the zoning ordinance for that, is that we said, you have height limits, and we made some things stricter than what the state did, which we did some tiering in some parts of the river where we lowered the height from what they wanted, and in other areas we said it would be at where they set it. But there was always this provision that you could ask for a conditional use permit to increase height in the river. But it's not that, hey, I'm not going to meet the standard, I'm just going to get a conditional use permit. It was, no, you meet this base standard, and if you want more height, then the plan for the critical area details the types of design features or things that you have to do to get that height. So I don't know if, Lars, I'm totally addressing the comment that you heard, because I'm not sure what comment it was. And so maybe I might be conflating issues, and I apologize if I'm doing that, but I just want people to know that the permitting for land use and in the zoning code is designed to have things like variances and conditional use permits that have
Right.
standards to be evaluated. So that's all I'm
I-
saying, just so you know.
I understand that, but you're still explaining that there's a process in place to change an existing zoning regulate or rule, and there doesn't seem to be the same process for anyone to change, one of the worst polluters on the river, the one that's going to be right next to where this amphitheater is going to be built. And I mean, it seems to many of us that they're working on like the deck is so stacked against, everyone with GAF because they're working on something no one can seem to touch, and no one has an answer why that's the case. I mean, Owens Corning right up the road has a completely different permit than GAF, and they do the exact same thing. So it's pretty insulting, and it's pretty frustrating to be volunteering so many hours of our time on this committee, as we're basically proxies for the residents of Minneapolis, and we're repeatedly told there's nothing that can be done because they have a permit that they've been grandfathered into, and like you said, I know what you're saying, Jim. I appreciate that, but you're still explaining that there's a process in place to change it, but not a process in place to ever do the same thing with GAF.
Yeah, and the reason I bring that up is just to help you guys articulate your comments, because being a government guy, I get letters like this all the time, and sometimes the way they're written can be, or the way they're presented can be more well received. So to me, I just want to finish, and then you can decide whether you guys think I make any sense or not, or whether I'm full of baloney. But to me, the way Lars, when I first heard it, it felt like, and I'm not saying this is right or wrong, but if I was a government person reading it, I would hear, hey, you came out and insulted us. And the response would probably be, well, we're just saying that's the process, and I mean, it's easy to dismiss. But I think if you flipped it on its head, like you were doing the second time you explained it, which is, the city develops processes for flexibility in its zoning, why, and processes for evaluating, why isn't that same opportunity afforded for these other permits? Why is it just we have no say in that? I mean, and I'm not being very articulate, but I mean, to me, I think that might be more impactful way to say it.
Yeah. So I'm the first to admit that with this particular issue, I'm way more emotional than rational. So any advice on how we can actually reach people on that and like put this in a letter that's constructive, I'm all for. That's fine, and that's great. I would love to. I mean, and I'm not even saying I'm the one to do it. I'm not saying I have a great way to articulate that, but in this draft. But it's just one particular point of the discussion that got extremely heated last week that I didn't make a comment on last week, but I wanted to this week.
Thanks, Lars. And Jackie, you have your hand up.
Yeah, so I wanted to ask how we would go about putting that in the letter. Like, should we make a new section to talk about this, or should we try to work it in to some of the other sections? Because I also got mad at Brandon, who put in the chat that the CPC said it was okay because it would make room for more affordable housing, without commenting on how much more room we could have for affordable housing if they didn't build a 10,000 person amphitheater.
Yeah.
But, so I like what you have about the permitting concerns right now. Is that what?
Yeah, I was thinking of maybe just adding a new section and putting a sentence or two there to address this. And I think to Jim's point, so the letter that we're writing right now is specifically for a public comment period on the environmental review process. And so I think, we can include whatever content, or the task force can include whatever content you want in the letter and make those points, because we will be sending this to the city council and the mayor's office as well. But a comment related to sort of the inherent inequity in those having permitting processes for one versus the other, it's not going to be addressed in the environmental review. That's like a bigger systemic issue that, I think in direct and indirect ways, this task force is confronting. And so I definitely think if folks want to include something like that in the letter, absolutely do it. You just probably won't get a very satisfactory, if any, response to it, because this, again, this specific process isn't intended to address that systemic issue.
So is there a way we could ask basically, like, is this necessary? Can the environmental review kind of decide if this conditional use permit is necessary, or is that more of like a development type question?
It's more of a development question for my understanding. So Jim, maybe you would want to provide your 2 cents on that. I think what the concern would be is if there was an environmental impact of the proposed height increase, like we could articulate what we think that environmental impact would be. My understanding of reading through the AUAR for the Mississippi River Critical Area overlay is that it's more about view sheds. So the ability for someone standing so far away from the river to be able to see the river than it is about actually protecting any environmental issues. And so as long as the height increases are done in such a way that it's tiered and like a tall building isn't built right on the water edge in front of a short building, it meets the intent of the critical overlay. Jim, maybe you could shed some light on that if I'm.
Well, there's a couple different things going on there, but one, the AUAR is really, again, whether we like the process or not, is more of a discovery document. It's not when it says somebody needs a CUP for height or a rezoning, it's not saying approve that. It's just saying that that's and then the process, so that can be a little frustrating, right? Because then we say go to this process and then you have to go to that process and it's tough. But as far as the critical area goes, yes, so I mean, I think one could say that there's an issue with height, but I think if you say the height, asking for an increase in height is not allowed in the critical area, that will be very easy to dismiss because it's factually not true. And I don't mean to be harsh about it, but it's not. I mean, I know because I sat in all the meetings, I read the legislation, I wrote the zoning ordinance. It's specifically written so you can ask for an increase in height if you meet certain standards. Now, if they came and built a building that cut down all the trees and built right up to the river and didn't taper and tier and consider view sheds, yeah, then we shouldn't approve it. But if they did the things they're supposed to do, it's supposed to be approved. So I think, you got to think about how you direct your comments. Again, people can say anything they want, but if you say things that are factually untrue, I just know from doing this work, it makes it super easy just to dismiss everything and dismiss the intent and everything, to just say, nope, that's not what the critical area says, move on. And so, I would try to avoid doing that if you can. I would add on the critical area, yes, it is about the view corridors. And one thing to be aware of is we specifically said what view corridors are. It wasn't just any view anywhere from anybody. And I won't bore you with all of that, but then there is some environmental, there are setbacks from the river and there are things called primary conservation areas. And actually, whether one agrees with it or not, one of the reasons we want to allow some height is, maybe somebody can build a taller building that avoids an environmentally sensitive area or has a smaller footprint rather than a longer, shorter building. So again, I'm not sure everybody would agree with that, but that was the thought behind it. So Kelly, sorry, I'm not sure if I'm answering the question or not.
Yeah, I think that helps me understand. Do others still have clarifying questions?
Do we still have quorum if Michelle's gone?
Yeah, so we met quorum when the meeting started.
Oh, okay, so we're good. Okay.
So do others, maybe I should ask, do others have any ideas on how to include a sentence or two about this? Or do you have any concerns about including a sentence or two in the letter related to, and if I could summarize it, the inequity of having a process for conditional permits to increase height, but not having a process to address the permits that allow indefinite, essentially, operation of industrial facilities. Not hearing any objections to including it. Julie, I know you've been taking notes. Do you have any ideas on how to put together a couple sentences?
Gee, call me out, why don't you?
Yep.
I can go in the document and write something up while you guys continue chatting, if that's helpful.
Okay, that would be great. Well, Julia's working on that. Are there any other additions or issues that we would either want to address in this, possibly flag for another conversation, or anything that's in the letter that you would not agree with? Anyone we haven't heard from tonight? Akia or Joanne? Yolanda?
Yes.
Do you have any concerns or any additions to add into the letter?
No, not at this time.
Okay. Just wanted to make sure everyone who's on has a chance to speak up.
Sorry, I heard you, but I was trying to keep an eye on this motorcycle that was right next to me. I didn't want to
Okay.
like strike them.
Yep. Be safe.
For me, I think just kind of a little comment or thoughts, but pertaining to the contamination section about how the city is planning to do more reassessment. I was looking at the NPCA's website on what's in my neighborhood and their Upper Harbor Terminal site, and it seems like they have the PCA has some kind of idea of what kind of pollutants are present at the site. I was wondering if the city is aware of these resources and already know about these contaminants, or are they trying to pursue with more assessment of other contaminants that may be present in addition to the ones that are already been presented in the site? That I know that the MnDOT did some assessment and they submitted the contaminants they found to PCA. Just wanted to know if the city like incorporated that into the UAR, but it wasn't really clear.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I don't know the answer to that. I don't know if Jim, you have any insights. I do know that the planning department, the staff have been working on the Upper Harbor Terminal. They do have a number of sort of like site contamination documents listed on the Upper Harbor Terminal website. And I don't know if that includes all of the ones that you found. I don't know. Ikia, did you have a chance to look at any of the contaminants that were listed, or like even a summary of the document to see like was the MPCA noting any concerns about the contaminants that we'd want to raise in the letter?
I think some of the contaminants noted were volatile organic compounds, and then burnt wood concrete, and then asphalt concrete from a previous industrial use, but also diesel, range organics, hydrocarbons, and gasoline. So a lot of variable contaminants, but they're kind of listed in some of the letter that the MPCA has on their site.
Okay.
And I don't think it was specifically mentioned in the AUAR about that, though.
I think we could definitely just allude to the fact that MPCA already knows that there's stuff there when we're talking about, we would prefer that they would be proactive. So we prefer that they would be proactive because we already know from the MPCA that there's contaminants on site.
All right, let me see where we would add that in. Let's see. So maybe adding after the question, what will the criteria be for undertaking additional phase 2 assessment? Something like the MPCA already knows of many contaminants on site. And then including, Akia, do you have that list of 4 or so that you just mentioned that we could put in here as examples?
Yep, I dropped the link to the MPCA website, so we can probably look at that if anyone wants more references. But some of the ones that I saw in the letter were volatile organic compounds, and then burnt wood, concrete, asphalt, metals, polynuclear aromatic hydrocarbons, diesel range organics, gasoline range organics, and pesticides as some of them.
I've added several of them. I don't think I captured all of them, but I have volatile organic compounds, asphalts, metals, gasoline, pesticides, and PAHs. What's interesting is I don't think we have any monitors for PAHs in and around that site. So that's an area that the state and other government entities, I think, are still moving into, but they can be very toxic to health. Thanks, Akia. All right, looks like Julia's got some text here for permitting concerns. Julia, do you feel ready to read out what you've got?
It's a little rough. Give me like another minute or 2,
Okay.
if you can.
Yeah. I see Roxanne joined us. Welcome, Roxanne. We're just kind of editing through the letter, adding additional concerns that folks have.
Okay. Hey, I'm sorry. I was giving a ride to one of my students.
No worries. All right. Well, I'm in the document and I'm seeing what Julia's writing. I like it. I wonder if we want to just go with the first couple sentences to start with. And then see if, or I think it's the first 3 sentences, and then see if there's any concluding statements that folks want to add in. Julia, do you want to read what you wrote?
Sure. And I saw that you added something, so thank you for that. Okay, it reads, the Northside Green Zone Task Force understands that under the MRCCA, Minnesota River Critical something overlay, developers may legally request increased height allowances through conditional use permits. However, we would like it noted on record that we are frustrated with the inequity of the city having a process for conditional permits to increase building height but not having a process to address the non-expiring permit of industrial facilities such as GAF. Community members have experienced the negative health impacts of pollution from GAF for decades, yet have been repeatedly told that the city cannot do anything to get rid of the facility due to zoning. Correct me if that is incorrect.
I'd say the zoning and its permit.
Maybe we could end with saying like we would ask the AUAR to address the necessity of a conditional use permit and the development plan. To kind of tie it back into the AUAR at the end.
See, Lars, what do you think?
I liked the way that sounded, and I'm not trying to like hijack the greater purpose of the draft. It's just a very important part for a lot of us.
Absolutely.
I mean, it at least calls it out.
No, I think it's important. An important point and pointed. All right. How are folks feeling? Are you ready to vote? Are there additional comments or other things you want to include?
I'm ready to vote.
I move to approve.
I could second that.
All right, I will call roll. Jackie,
Yes.
Joanne,
Yes.
Michelle left, Akia,
Yes.
Lars,
Yes.
Yolanda is on hold a moment. And Roxanne.
Yes.
Great. That motion carries and the comment letter is approved. Congratulations, everyone. That was a very fast turnaround.
Woo woo.
Thank you all for spending your extra time on this, holding an additional meeting and all the communication between meetings. Unless there are any announcements or anything else that folks wanted to share now, I'll just note that our next meeting is a joint green zone meeting with the Southside Green Zone, and that will be on Tuesday, June 29th from 5 to 7.
Word. Thank you, everybody, for your hard work on this.
Thanks, everyone.
All right, so motion to adjourn.
Yep. And
Both.
I'll make the motion to adjourn.
All right. Have a great evening, everyone. Stay cool.
Bye,
Somebody-
everybody.
Bye, y'all.
Bye.
Good night, everyone.